Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves Caitlin Clark.
Updates in the ongoing WNBA CBA negotiations, and there is a brand new wrinkle to the storyline as it's been reported that there is a Saudi-backed basketball league that will be kicking off next season, and this could truly change everything.
Hey, is this enough to entice Caitlin Clark? $20 million deal, 30, 40, $50 million deal.
Welcome back to Clark Hoop Nuxes. Today we have another major WNBA story to break down, and this one could have enormous implications for the future of women's basketball. For months, the conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark has centered on criticism, controversy, and debates over how the league has handled its biggest emerging star. But while those arguments have dominated the headlines, a much bigger business question is beginning to attract attention. What happens when outside investors recognize the enormous commercial value surrounding women's basketball? Rumors circulating online have claimed that Saudi Arabia's public investment fund could have an interest in expanding its involvement in global sports, with Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham being mentioned in speculative discussions about the league's future. However, there is currently no verified evidence that the Saudi fund is preparing a $1 billion acquisition of the WNBA, where the Clark and Cunningham have been formally targeted in such a deal. Stephen A. Smith has frequently discussed the enormous business potential surrounding Clark and women's basketball, but claims that he officially confirmed a $1 billion Saudi acquisition should also be treated cautiously unless supported by a direct, verifiable statement. Still, the underlying business question is fascinating. Clark has become one of the most recognizable athletes in women's sports, while the WNBA is attracting increasing attention from broadcasters, sponsors, investors, and international audiences. That combination creates a valuable opportunity for anyone looking to invest in the future of women's basketball. And if major international investors ever decided to make a serious move into the WNBA, it could dramatically change the financial landscape of the sport. To understand why this speculation has generated so much attention, though, we first need to examine the person at the center of the conversation, Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith has been one of the most outspoken commentators on Caitlin Clark and the business potential surrounding women's basketball. He has argued that Clark's popularity has created an extraordinary commercial opportunity for the WNBA, while also criticizing the way the league has handled some of the controversies surrounding her. However, claims that Smith has officially confirmed a Saudi-backed $1 billion acquisition or investment involving Clark and Sophie Cunningham should be treated cautiously unless there's a verifiable statement or report supporting them. The financial discussion itself is much more concrete. Clark entered the WNBA under the league's existing rookie compensation structure, meaning her initial salary was determined by the collective bargaining framework rather than her individual market value. That created an obvious contrast between her on-court compensation and the enormous commercial attention surrounding her. Her games generated major television audiences, strong ticket demand, merchandise interest, and unprecedented media coverage, making the question of how players capture more of that economic value increasingly important. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, meanwhile, is one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds and has made major investments across global sports, but that does not establish that it is preparing a $1 billion offer for Clark or planning to purchase the WNBA. That remains speculation. What makes the rumor compelling is the larger possibility behind it. If international investors begin competing aggressively for women's basketball properties, leagues and players could gain entirely new sources of revenue and negotiating power. In that scenario, Clark would not simply be viewed as a rookie trying to establish herself. She would be viewed as one of the most commercially valuable athletes in the sport, and that could fundamentally change the conversation about player compensation, media rights, sponsorships, and the future business model of women's basketball. This is where the LIB Golf comparison becomes interesting. But it's important to separate that history from the unverified Saudi League rumors surrounding the WNBA. When Saudi-backed LIB Golf entered the market, it challenged the established professional golf structure by offering players enormous financial incentives and creating an alternative platform, eventually forcing the PGA Tour and Saudi Arabia's public investment fund into negotiations. That history shows how a well-funded competitor can dramatically change athletes' leverage. However, there is currently no verified evidence that Saudi Arabia is preparing a hostile takeover of the WNBA, that a new Saudi women's basketball league is targeting Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, or that Clark has received a $1 billion offer, so those claims should be presented as speculation rather than fact. The hypothetical scenario is easy to understand. If an outside investor created a competing women's basketball league with enormous financial resources, the most effective strategy would be to attract recognizable stars first. Caitlin Clark would obviously be an extraordinary target because of her massive audience and commercial profile, while Sophie Cunningham could theoretically complement that strategy because of her recognizable personality, physical style, and social media presence. But saying that the two have actually been selected as targets requires evidence that has not been established. The bigger issue is player leverage. If a credible alternative league ever emerged and offered dramatically higher compensation, better facilities, premium travel, and greater control over player marketing, WNBA stars would suddenly have another option. That would put pressure on the existing league to improve salaries, working conditions, media opportunities, and revenue sharing. And that is where the LIV golf comparison really matters. The most disruptive part of an outside competitor would not simply be the money, it would be the fact that players would finally have a choice. The WNBA would have to compete for its own stars rather than assuming those stars had nowhere else to go. For Caitlin Clark specifically, the question would become much bigger than salary. She would have to weigh loyalty to the league that drafted her against financial opportunity, competitive credibility, teammates, sponsorships, travel, long-term legacy, and the possibility of becoming the face of an entirely new basketball organization. That hypothetical decision could reshape women's professional basketball, but right now, the Saudi takeover story remains a rumor, not a confirmed development. But that wasn't the case. As soon as she stepped onto the court, it was open season. Diana Taurasi had already warned Clark about the reality she was about to face during the Final Four. And at the time, it sounded bitter. The old guard appeared to feel threatened by the arrival of a new generation. Then the games began. We saw Clark pressured full court, hammered in the paint, and knocked to the floor while officials appeared to swallow their whistles. The Kennedy Carter incident was particularly painful and sent a message that quickly spread around the basketball world. Stephen A. Smith exploded after the play, questioning why the league wasn't doing more to protect its biggest star and asking where her teammates were. The narrative became impossible to ignore. Some WNBA veterans were not ready to hand over the reins. In that kind of environment, an escape option suddenly starts looking very appealing. Why stay in a workplace where you feel your success is creating resentment when another opportunity could offer dramatically more money and a completely different environment? And this wouldn't even be the first outside offer. Remember the Big Three? Ice Cube publicly offered Caitlin Clark $5 million to play 8 games in his 3-on-3 league. $5 million for 8 games was more than she could make under her rookie WNBA contract. Yet she turned it down because her goal was to establish herself in the WNBA and compete for a championship. But that was before the physicality, the non-stop media circus, and the controversy surrounding how she was treated. Now, the rumored Saudi proposal makes that earlier offer look almost insignificant. The difference is infrastructure. This alleged Saudi opportunity wouldn't simply be a side job. It could represent an entirely different basketball ecosystem, with fewer games, luxury travel, massive financial backing, and no traditional WNBA salary limitations. Whether the Saudi rumors ultimately prove true or not, one thing has already been demonstrated. Caitlin Clark's market value is far larger than the salary structure currently attached to her. The Saudis are proving they have the means to ensure its durability. Let's look at this from the perspective of WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. If these rumors are true, she is in grave danger. The WNBA is currently negotiating a new media rights agreement, with billions of dollars being requested from networks like Disney, Amazon, and NBC. Their entire pitch is based on the Caitlin Clark effect. As they show the graphs of the fast-growing audience, they are telling the networks to pay for that growth. However, if Clark announces that she is accepting a deal with a rival league, that leverage abruptly vanishes. The networks wouldn't be investing billions in the WNBA without Clark. They are funding the Clark show. If she leaves, the TV deal could be thrown into uncertainty. If the TV deal fails, all of the players who benefited from the league's growth could lose revenue opportunities. It is the pinnacle of irony. By alienating the one player who helped generate so much attention, the league could potentially put its own financial future at risk. Stephen A. Smith has made references to this specific karma. If you bite the hand that feeds you, you don't expect to eat anymore. Now is the time to deal with the elephant in the room. When the Saudi PIF is involved, the moral debate is always on full display. We learned about it from LIV Golf, just as we did when Cristiano Ronaldo joined the Saudi Professional League. We will hear it here. Human rights records and the use of sports to enhance a country's prestige will be points of contention. But morality doesn't cover the mortgage, as Stephen A. Smith often notes. When athletes are offered enormous sums of money, financial reality can become difficult to ignore. Before everyone became used to it, the outrage about golfers taking Saudi-backed money persisted for months. Female athletes face an even more challenging moral dilemma as a result of their ongoing financial struggles. Can we really blame a WNBA player for taking a multi-million-dollar check when her current employer values her at a fraction of that amount? History shows that supporters follow talent despite differences among fans on the internet. If Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark play basketball on the moon, people will watch. The outrage is short-lived. The wealth that has been passed down through the centuries endures. Let's take a closer look at the Sophie Cunningham connection. This implies that the new league would not employ the traditional city-based team structure. It would most likely be a tour model similar to tennis or golf. Imagine a situation where famous players like Clark, Cunningham, and others travel to major cities like New York, London, Tokyo, and Dubai to compete in high-stakes tournaments or exhibition matches. This strategy eliminates the boring regular season games that attract less attention and instead creates a concentrated product built around the biggest stars. The entire focus would be on the show. By introducing Sophie Cunningham alongside Caitlin Clark, a hypothetical new league could create a powerful combination of basketball talent, personality, and social media appeal. Their contrasting styles and recognizable profiles would give marketers plenty to work with, and a breakaway competition built around major stars could potentially attract casual viewers who might not otherwise follow an entire WNBA season. But the idea that Clark and Cunningham were preparing to join a Saudi-backed league remains unconfirmed. There is no verified evidence that either player has signed such an agreement, that their representatives are negotiating one, or that their silence represents an imminent departure from the WNBA. Silence from an athlete or agent should not automatically be interpreted as confirmation. The timing would certainly make the hypothetical scenario interesting because professional athletes face significant physical and financial demands throughout a long season, and an alternative league offering dramatically higher compensation and premium travel could become attractive if it were ever presented as a legitimate option. The bigger question is, what would happen if a well-funded competitor actually emerged? The WNBA could face unprecedented pressure to improve player compensation, revenue sharing, travel, facilities, and commercial opportunities. At the same time, the players would have to consider the credibility, competitiveness, longevity, and purpose of any alternative league before leaving an established organization. So, is a billion-dollar Saudi-backed league featuring Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham actually happening? Right now, there is no reliable confirmation that it is. But the fact that people are seriously discussing such a possibility demonstrates how dramatically the economics of women's basketball have changed. If an alternative league ever offered Clark and other stars life-changing money, the WNBA would have to compete for their loyalty rather than simply assume it. And that could become one of the biggest turning points in the history of women's professional sports.